Melody Harper, Melody to her friends, never considered herself exceptional by Earth standards, average height, average grades, and an average life in an average suburb of New Chicago. So when the Galactic Federation announced its first ever human exchange program, she figured her average odds were as good as anyone's. One application, 17 invasive medical scans, and 3 diplomatic waivers later, she found herself aboard the GFS Enlightenment, headed for the most prestigious learning institution in the known universe. "Welcome, Earth specimen, to Galactic Academy Station," chirped the holographic greeter as Mel stepped through the airlock. "Please proceed to decontamination before interacting with evolved species." Mel rolled her eyes. "It's human, not Earth specimen, and I've already been decontaminated. Twice." The hologram flickered. "Protocol requires triple decontamination for Class 3 developing worlds. Your species has only mastered interplanetary travel within your own solar system. This classifies you as potentially contaminated with primitive thinking." "Great. I haven't even started classes, and I'm already failing the evolution curve." Mel hefted her single-approved duffel bag and trudged toward the glowing purple arch. The academy itself was breathtaking, a massive ring station rotating around a captured microstar, with transparent corridors offering views of swirling nebulae and distant galaxies. Unfortunately, no one had told the other students to be equally breathtaking in their hospitality. "Look, it's the human," whispered a cluster of what appeared to be floating jellyfish with too many eyes. "I heard they still use combustion engines." "And biological reproduction," added another, its translucent body turning a scandalized shade of purple. Mel pretended not to hear, as she consulted her orientation tablet, searching for dormitory Hex 7, her assigned living quarter. The tablet, a thin sheet of something that definitely wasn't glass but behaved like it, suddenly spoke. "You are holding me upside down. This is inefficient." "Sorry," Mel muttered, rotating the device. "Where I come from, technology doesn't usually criticize its users." "Primitive interfaces," the tablet remarked with unmistakable disdain. By the time she located her dormitory pod, Mel had been snickered at by what looked like sentient crystals, avoided by a pack of 6-limbed felines, and scanned without permission by 3 different species she couldn't even begin to describe. Her roommate situation didn't improve matters. "You are the human?" asked a tall, willowy creature with iridescent skin and 4 arms, each holding a different electronic device. "I am Lixnara, xenobiology major. I requested you specifically. Your species' inefficient circulatory system fascinates me." "Nice to meet you too," Mel said, dropping her bag on the unoccupied sleeping platform. "I'm Melody Harper. Political science and galactic history." "History." A gurgling laugh emerged from somewhere in Lixnara's throat region. "Why would a species with barely 10,000 years of recorded civilization study history? Maybe to avoid making the same mistakes as species who think they're too advanced for mistakes," Mel replied with a tight smile. Before Lixnara could respond, another figure appeared at their doorway, broad-shouldered, gray-skinned, with 3 yellowish eyes arranged in a triangle pattern. "The mess facility is serving protein supplements compatible with oxygen breathers," the newcomer announced. "I am Vrax, from neighboring dormitory unit. I thought the human might require sustenance after interstellar travel." "Actually, I'm starving," Mel admitted. "Thanks, Vrax." As they navigated the crowded corridors toward the mess hall, Vrax leaned closer. "Do not mind Lixnara. The Ulfiri consider themselves the aesthetic ideal of evolution, and do not mind the others either. Most have never seen a human outside of entertainment broadcasts." "What do your entertainment broadcasts say about humans?" Mel asked, dreading the answer. Vrax's 3 eyes blinked in sequence. "That you are violent, emotional, technologically backward, but inexplicably good at rhythmic sound patterns called music, and surprisingly adept at surviving scenarios that should kill you." "Well," Mel sighed, "at least we've got music and cockroach-level survival skills going for us." The mess hall fell silent as they entered. Hundreds of alien eyes, some clustered, some singular, some seemingly everywhere and nowhere at once, turned toward Mel. "Perhaps," whispered Vrax, "you should demonstrate some of that survival skill now." Mel's first week at Galactic Academy made Earth's most rigorous universities look like preschool finger-painting sessions. Her Introduction to Quantum Civilization course required understanding mathematics that Earth's brightest minds were still centuries away from discovering. Comparative species ethics featured moral dilemmas involving concepts her translator chip couldn't even properly render in English. And practical telekinesis for non-Shonic species was just embarrassing. Again, Harper, instructed Professor Gelloam, a cloud of glittering particles contained within a hovering environment suit. "Focus your primitive neural pathways on the molecular structure of the object." Mel stared at the small cube on her desk until her eyes watered. Nothing happened. Professor, she finally said, humans don't have telekinetic abilities. The professor's particles swirled and what Mel had learned was the equivalent of an exasperated sigh. All sentient species have latent telekinetic potential, some simply require more significant evolution. Snickers rippled through the classroom. Mel felt her cheeks burning. Perhaps in another million years, called out a student from the back, one of the crystalline beings who seemed to take particular delight in her struggles. But no class was quite as challenging as advanced interspecies history and development, taught by the infamous Professor Krell, a 12-tentacled Vorquin with skin like polished obsidian. Krell was considered the foremost historian in 3 galactic sectors. He was also, as Mel quickly discovered, thoroughly prejudiced against emerging intelligences. Today Krell announced, his tentacles undulating dramatically as he floated above his podium, we shall discuss the crisis of conscience that led to the Third Galactic Reformation. But first, his eye stalks swiveled toward Mel. Our human guest, tell us what was your species doing approximately 15,000 standard cycles ago? Mel swallowed. 15,000 years ago, humans were just developing early agriculture and permanent settlements. Precisely, Professor Krell's voice boomed. While the Zendari Collective was already mastering dimensional engineering, and my own species was establishing the philosophical foundations of pan-species ethics, humans were discovering that seeds grow into plants. Fascinating. The classroom erupted with the various sounds of alien amusement. However, Krell continued, this provides us an excellent living specimen of pre-integration development. Harper, your perspective on historical events will necessarily be limited by your species' neural architecture and evolutionary timeline. Do you comprehend this fundamental limitation? Mel gritted her teeth. I comprehend that judging species solely by their technological development might miss other valuable traits, Professor. Krell's tentacles stiffened. Indeed, and what valuable traits has humanity contributed to the galactic community? Besides an unusual obsession with projectile weapons and fermenting foodstuffs. Before Mel could answer, Krell activated a holographic display in the center of the lecture hall. Today's lesson requires the use of a historical immersion field. Everyone activate your neural protectors. Students around the room touched various appendages to small devices on their desks. Mel looked around in confusion. Professor, she raised her hand, I wasn't issued a neural protector. Krell's eye stalks quivered with what might have been satisfaction. Of course not. Human brains aren't developed enough to be damaged by the immersion field's psychic components. Your species lacks the necessary neural complexity. The classroom darkened. Suddenly, the air filled with vivid three-dimensional images of an ancient alien cityscape, while knowledge and sensory impressions flooded directly into Mel's consciousness. The sensation was overwhelming, like having an encyclopedia downloaded directly into her frontal lobe while simultaneously experiencing the emotional states of beings long dead. She slumped forward, gasping, as the immersion field intensified. Fascinating, Krell observed clinically. The human appears to be experiencing neural overload despite their theoretical immunity. Perhaps their systems are even less developed than current models suggest. Through her pain, Mel heard a familiar voice, Vrax, speaking urgently. Professor, humans have different neural architecture, not inferior. Their sensitivity to psychic fields is well documented. Nonsense, Krell dismissed. The field is calibrated for it. Mel never heard the rest. The immersion field had become a tornado in her mind, historical facts and alien emotions whirling through her consciousness until the classroom disappeared entirely. She awoke in the Academy's medical facility, the sterile white ceiling swimming into focus as her eyes adjusted. The human recovers, announced a melodic voice. A being composed of interlocking geometric patterns hovered nearby, medical instruments orbiting around it. Neural patterns stabilizing. Thanks, Mel croaked, her throat dry. What happened? Professor Krell happened, said Vrax, stepping into view. He claims ignorance of human neurological vulnerability to unfiltered immersion fields. But you're okay now, came another voice. Mel turned to see Lixnara approaching, looking oddly concerned for someone who had previously viewed her as little more than an interesting specimen. The medical AI constructed a specialized neural protector for you. Apparently, humans aren't too primitive for immersion fields, you're actually too sensitive. Your brains process emotional input more intensely than most species. Great, Mel muttered, another human weakness to add to the list. Not weakness, Vrax corrected. Difference. And Professor Krell has been formally reprimanded. Though he maintains it was a simple oversight. Mel sat up slowly, Something tells me there will be many oversights in that class. Perhaps Vrax acknowledged, all three eyes blinking in sequence, a gesture Mel had learned indicated thoughtfulness. But you have demonstrated something important today. What's that? Human fragility, resilience, Vrax replied. Any Thrixian would have experienced permanent psychic scarring from that level of immersion overload. You merely lost consciousness, most impressive for a species that supposedly lacks neural complexity. As Mel left the medical facility, neural protector now safely attached to her temple, she couldn't shake the feeling that Professor Krell's oversight had been entirely intentional. What she couldn't figure out was why a respected academic would risk his position just to humiliate one human exchange student. She would soon discover that interspecies politics at Galactic Academy ran much deeper and darker than academic rivalry. The atmosphere at Galactic Academy shifted subtly over the following weeks. Mel noticed it first in the mess hall, where different species had begun clustering more distinctly, their usual intermingling replaced by wary glances across tables. The Academy's usual academic competition had taken on an edge that felt less scholarly and more tribal. The Procyon Alliance is mobilizing their deep space fleet. Mel overheard a group of insectoid Trizzy students chittering over their nutritional gel. My hive cousin works in communications relay. Says they've gone to security level amber. Nonsense, responded a floating cloud of luminous particles, a Quarksy student. The Treaty of Deneb explicitly forbids military positioning within the neutral education zones. Treaties, scoffed another student, his reptilian scales shifting color with his agitation, are only as good as the plasma cannons backing them. When Mel sat down beside Vrax with her tray of what the food synthesizer had assured her was human-compatible protein arrangement, she nodded toward the unusually segregated dining hall. What's with everyone lately? Even the floating jellyfish students are staying in their own corner, and they usually love drifting around annoying everyone. Vrax's middle eye closed, his species equivalent of a frown. You haven't been monitoring galactic news feeds. My translator chip doesn't interface properly with the news terminals. It keeps translating everything into what it calls human comprehension level, which apparently means I get the equivalent of children's stories with most of the important details filtered out. Vrax lowered his voice. The Procyon Alliance and the Centauri Concord are in a diplomatic standoff. Resource rights in the Epsilon sector. Mel shrugged. Sounds like standard interstellar politics. Not standard. The Epsilon sector borders Earth's solar system. That got her attention. Wait, what? Why would advanced civilizations care about territory near Earth? We barely have Mars colonized. Your solar system occupies strategic positioning for quantum slipstream access, Vrax explained, and some believe Earth itself has potential for what? Before Vrax could answer, an announcement chimed throughout the facility. All students report to designated academic sessions. Today's special lecture series on historical conflict resolution will be mandatory attendance. Vrax's gray skin paled slightly. That's Krell's department. Professor Krell was in rare form that day. His tentacles writhed with unusual animation as he manipulated the classroom's holographic displays, showing star maps and diplomatic archives with flourishes that seemed almost theatrical. The historical record clearly demonstrates, he proclaimed, that developing species require guidance during galactic transitions. Some lack the evolutionary capacity for self-determination on a cosmic scale. The professor's eye stalks swiveled toward Mel. For instance, when the Arcturus Federation discovered the Trenari, a species only slightly more advanced than our human guest civilization, they wisely established protectorate status over them. The alternative would have been allowing the Trenari to blunder into interstellar affairs, potentially destabilizing carefully balanced systems. Mel raised her hand, something she'd learned to do sparingly in Krell's class. Yes, Harper. Krell's voice carried the special condescension he reserved just for her. The Trenari Protectorate eventually led to the Arcturus Rebellion and the collapse of the entire Federation, she pointed out. We covered that last week. The careful balance wasn't so balanced for the species being protected. A ripple of uncomfortable murmurs spread through the classroom. Several students shifted nervously in their seats. An oversimplification, Krell dismissed with a tentacle wave. The rebellion was an unfortunate result of radical elements failing to appreciate the necessary structure of galactic hierarchy. Or maybe, Mel pressed, species don't like being told they're too primitive to make their own decisions. Krell's skin darkened, the Vorquin equivalent of flushing with anger. Your species' history of warfare and self-destruction hardly qualifies you to judge galactic governance, Harper. Perhaps if humans evolved beyond killing each other over geographic boundaries and imaginary deities, your opinion would carry more weight. Before Mel could respond, the classroom door hissed open. A tall metallic being entered, an administrative drone, its surface inscribed with the official insignia of Academy security. "Professor Krell," it intoned in a perfectly modulated voice. "Your presence is requested at an emergency faculty assembly. All classes are to be held in standard lecture mode until further notice." Krell's tentacles twisted in what might have been irritation. "Very well. Students, review the historical archives on the Gamma Ceti Accords while I attend to this interruption." After he glided from the room, the classroom erupted into concerned whispers. "Emergency assembly, is it about the border dispute? My parent cluster says we should prepare for evacuation." Mel turned to Vrax, who was uncharacteristically still, all three eyes fixed on his data terminal. "What's going on?" she asked. "Look," he replied, angling his screen toward her. Unlike the simplified news feeds her translator had been showing her, this was raw data, fleet movements, diplomatic channels suddenly going silent, and trading routes being redirected away from the region of space that included her home. "Earth is being discussed in closed Concord sessions," Vrax explained quietly. "The Procyans believe humanity should be brought under protective oversight given the proximity to potential conflict zones. They want to take over Earth, for our own good?" Mel felt a chill run through her. That's what Krell's been hinting at in his lectures. He's been setting the ideological groundwork. It appears so, and he's not alone. Many faculty members have been emphasizing similar historical precedents. Mel looked around the classroom, noticing for the first time how the students had subtly repositioned themselves. Those from Procyon-aligned worlds sat clustered together, while Centauri-affiliated species had drifted to the opposite side. A few, like Vrax, remained in the middle, neutral or unaligned. "This isn't just academic anymore, is it?" she asked. "The Academy has always been where galactic politics plays out before official channels acknowledge it." Vrax replied. "Students here become the diplomatic corps, the fleet commanders, the planetary governors of tomorrow." Mel's gaze drifted to the viewport beside their desk. In the distance, she could see unusual movement, ships maneuvering in patterns that seemed less like the usual transport traffic, and more like, "Are those military vessels?" she asked, pointing. Vrax's eyes followed her gesture. "Security craft. For protection. Whose protection? And from what?" Before Vrax could answer, the classroom lighting suddenly shifted to a deep amber hue. The doors sealed with an ominous hiss. "Attention," announced the Academy's central AI. "Security Protocol Delta 7 is now in effect. All students remain in current locations. Faculty proceed to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." The simulated windows showing peaceful spacescapes flickered and went dark, replaced by security barrier indicators. Around the classroom, students began to vocalize distress in a dozen different biological ways. Mel's eyes met Vrax's. "I'm guessing this isn't normal." "No," he replied grimly. "This is what happens when diplomatic tensions become something else entirely." A distant rumble shook the classroom, causing several floating students to wobble mid-air. "Something tells me," Mel said quietly, "that war just broke out in class." The first explosion hit just as Professor Krell was rushing back into the classroom, his tentacles flailing in what appeared to be genuine panic. The blast wasn't close enough to damage their section, but the station's artificial gravity fluctuated alarmingly, sending several floating students careening into the ceiling before the emergency systems compensated. "Remain calm," Krell commanded, though his own voice modulator was pitching higher than normal. "The Academy is under temporary security measures due to a misunderstanding between diplomatic vessels." "Misunderstanding," Mel repeated incredulously as another distant boom resonated through the structure. "Those are weapons impacts." The classroom erupted into chaos, students chittering, buzzing, vibrating, and otherwise expressing alarm in their species-specific ways. Some huddled together by planetary alliance, others attempted to access their personal communication devices, and a few simply froze in biostasis, their evolutionary response to extreme danger. "Silence," Krell's voice amplified to painful levels. "As the senior faculty member present, I am invoking Academy Protocol 5.7. This classroom is now a secure containment zone until the administrative AI confirms it is safe to evacuate." The main doors sealed with a metallic thunk, and emergency force fields shimmered into existence over the viewports. "Our location is ideal," Krell continued, attempting to sound authoritative despite the tremor in his voice. "This section of the station has triple reinforced bulkheads due to the historical artifacts stored in the adjacent wing." "What exactly is happening?" demanded a tall, spindly student with 4 arms and bioluminescent patches that were currently flashing in distress patterns. Krell's eye stalk swiveled nervously. "A security incident. Nothing to..." The classroom's information terminal suddenly activated on its own, projecting a station-wide emergency broadcast. The face, or what passed for a face, of the Academy's chancellor filled the display. Attention all Academy personnel and students, our neutrality has been violated. Forces aligned with both the Procyon Alliance and the Centauri Concord have engaged in unauthorized military action within our security perimeter. The station's defensive systems are active, but key areas have been compromised. Remain in security lockdown. Diplomatic channels are being. The transmission dissolved into static as another explosion, much closer this time, shook the classroom. Lights flickered, and several students cried out in alarm. The Chancellor's deck was hit, gasped a crystalline student, their facets darkening with fear. That's on the other side of the station. We need to contact Central Security, Krell muttered, his tentacles working frantically over the communication console. The response system is not acknowledging faculty override codes. Because it's been compromised, Mel said, stepping forward. Look at the terminal status, half the network nodes are dark. I hardly think a human understands our advanced systems better than Krell began, but was interrupted by the horrifying sound of tearing metal from somewhere down the corridor. The classroom went silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just locked down, they were cut off. Professor, said Vrax, his normally calm voice tight with tension, we need to establish our situation and available resources. Yes, of course. Krell seemed to gather himself slightly. As your instructor, I will naturally take command of this emergency situation. My extensive knowledge of historical crisis management will, with respect, Professor, interrupted a massive armor-plated student from the back row. This isn't a historical crisis. We need practical action. My species has military training requirements. I suggest we inventory our defensive capabilities. Defensive? Krell's skin paled. Surely you're not suggesting we'll be attacked. Another impact rocked the station, and this time the lights didn't just flicker, they switched to emergency red, casting the classroom in an ominous crimson glow. Life support is now on emergency power, announced the room's local AI. Atmospheric integrity is at 92% and stabilizing. Warning: unauthorized entry detected in adjacent corridors. Security countermeasures offline. The mood in the classroom shifted instantly from fear to something worse, the beginning of panic. Students began shouting over each other. We need weapons. We need to surrender. My species requires specific atmospheric conditions to survive. The Procyons are behind this. No, it's Centauri aggression. Krell's tentacles wrapped around himself in a self-protective gesture. Everyone must remain calm and follow historical precedent for civilian non-combatants in conflict zones, which clearly indicates passive cooperation is the optimal survival strategy. Is he seriously suggesting we just sit here? Mel whispered to Vrax. Vorquins evolved as deep-sea prey animals, Vrax replied quietly. Their instinct is to hide and hope the predator chooses another target. Mel looked around the room, taking in the increasingly hostile division forming between students from rival political blocs. The Procyon-aligned species had gathered on one side, the Centauri affiliated on the other. Those from neutral worlds huddled in small, frightened clusters. Professor Krell had retreated behind his teaching podium, muttering about historical casualty statistics and proper surrender protocols. The classroom's only faculty member, supposedly their leader in this crisis, was essentially useless. That's when Mel heard it, a faint but unmistakable sound from the maintenance access panel near the back of the room. Someone or something was trying to cut through. We've got incoming, she announced, pointing to the panel where a red-hot line was beginning to trace its way around the edges. The reaction was immediate. Several students produced small personal defense devices, items technically prohibited, but apparently common enough. Others retreated to defensive positions or shifted into biological configurations better suited for conflict. The divide between political factions grew more pronounced, with suspicious glares across the invisible line now separating the room. It could be rescue teams, offered a hopeful voice. Or boarding parties, countered another. The cutting tool had nearly completed its circuit of the panel. Whatever was coming through would be inside within moments. Professor Krell, seeing the imminent breach, did what apparently came naturally to him. He fainted, collapsing into a heap of tentacles behind his podium. Great, Mel muttered. Our fearless leader. She looked around at the fracturing classroom, half the students ready to attack the other half, some preparing to attack whatever came through the panel, others frozen in terror, and their professor unconscious. This wasn't just a classroom in danger, it was a diplomatic powder keg. If students started fighting among themselves, it would be a microcosm of the larger conflict tearing apart the station. With a final hiss, the cutting tool completed its circuit. The maintenance panel clattered to the floor, and a figure emerged from the darkness beyond. a security droid, its outer casing scorched and damaged, missing one arm, and moving with jerky motions that suggested serious system damage. This section, compromised, it announced in a stuttering mechanical voice. Hostile forces, both factions, targeting neutral education zones. Chancellor's orders, protect students until evacuation. The droid sparked violently and collapsed, its systems failing completely. A stunned silence fell over the classroom, broken only by the distant sounds of conflict elsewhere in the station. Both factions, Mel repeated quietly. They're both attacking the neutral zones. But why? Asked a small amphibious student, their breathing apparatus whirring anxiously. What strategic value does a classroom of students have? We're the future, Vrax realized, his three eyes widening. Future diplomats, scientists, leaders, whoever controls the next generation of galactic elite, controls the narrative of this conflict. Mel looked around at the terrified faces of her classmates, at the unconscious professor, at the smoking remains of the security droid. The situation was deteriorating by the minute, and no help was coming, at least, no help they could trust. Another explosion rocked the station, closer than any before. The lights flickered again, and for a moment, the artificial gravity wavered, causing everyone to float slightly before crashing back to the floor. This is bad, Vrax said unnecessarily. And getting worse. Mel took a deep breath. Coming to Galactic Academy had been about proving humans belonged among the stars, that they weren't just primitive curiosities from a backwater planet. She'd wanted to show that humanity had something to offer the galactic community. Now, as she watched the class split into hostile factions while their professor lay useless on the floor, she realized this might be her only chance. Everyone shut up and listen, she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos with surprising authority. We need to work together, or we're all going to die here. Politics won't matter if this section of the station gets blown apart. All eyes, stalks, sensory clusters, and other varied perception organs turned toward her, the primitive human who had just taken command. And why? Demanded a tall crystalline student with glowing red facets. Should we take orders from an underdeveloped species barely out of its planetary cradle? Mel smiled grimly. Because while you were all evolving past the need for survival instincts, my primitive species never had that luxury. And right now, primitive survival skills are exactly what we need. The classroom fell silent, waiting to see what the human would do next. First things first, Mel said, stepping to the center of the room. We need to know what we're working with. Everyone check what you have that might be useful, tools, tech, personal devices, even biological abilities your species might have. No holding back, based on Academy regulations. Those went out the airlock when the shooting started. The students hesitated, eyeing each other suspiciously across their political divide. Ofer, look, I'll start. Mel dug through her pockets. I've got a multi-tool knife that I smuggled past security, a lighter, some Earth snack bars, and a first aid nanopack. Your turn. After a moment, students began reluctantly cataloging their resources. The inventory revealed a surprising array of contraband technology, defensive items, and specialized biological capabilities that under normal circumstances would have resulted in disciplinary hearings. Fascinating how quickly Academy honor codes collapse, remarked Vrax, who had produced a small atmospheric analyzer from somewhere in his gray robes. Yeah, well, honor codes don't stop plasma weapons, Mel replied, mentally categorizing their available resources. All right, here's what we're doing. Lixnara, you and the other medically trained students check on Professor Krell and anyone else injured. Vrax, take the tech team, and see if we can hack into a local communication node. We need intel. What about defenses? Asked the armored student who had spoken earlier. If hostiles breach this section, we'll need early warning, Mel agreed. Take whoever has combat training or enhanced senses and establish a perimeter monitoring system. She pointed to the various access points around the classroom. Those maintenance tunnels connect to other sections. They could be access routes in or out. As students organized into functional teams rather than political factions, Mel turned her attention to the damaged security droid. Its central processing unit might still contain useful information. Anyone know droid tech? She called out. A gelatinous student with multiple appendages oozed forward. My progenitor cluster manufactures security systems. I might be able to extract its memory core. Do it. Mel nodded. While the others worked, Mel examined the classroom's environmental controls. Every Earth kid knew the basics of building improvised tools. It was practically a rite of passage to MacGyver something together when the situation called for it. While advanced alien species had evolved beyond such primitive needs, humans still had the knack. Using her multi-tool, she pried open the environmental control panel and studied its components. With a few modifications, she might be able to rig up a short-range scanner that could detect approaching lifeforms or energy signatures. "What are you doing?" asked a floating jellyfish-like student who had drifted over to observe. "Improvising," Mel replied without looking up. "Something humans excel at. Your species lacks technological telepathy, instantaneous mathematical processing, and quantum perception," the jellyfish stated matter-of-factly. "How can you understand such advanced systems? I don't need to understand every subatomic principle to know that if I cross these circuits and reroute power through this regulator, I can create a crude motion detector." Mel twisted two components together, generating a small spark. Sometimes understanding less means you're not limited by what's supposed to be possible. A commotion from the medical team interrupted her work. Professor Krell had regained consciousness and was gesticulating wildly with his tentacles. "This is outrageous," he sputtered. "Students taking control during a crisis contradicts all historical precedent for academic emergency protocols." "With respect, Professor," Mel called over her shoulder, "Earth history is full of examples where rigid hierarchy failed during crises. Adaptability trumps protocol when the situation goes sideways." "Preposterous. The proper response is clear. We must signal our surrender to whichever faction reaches us first and hope for lenient treatment as non-combatants." The room went silent as students processed this suggestion. "Surrender?" The crystalline student's facets flashed with indignation. "My cluster is aligned with the Centauri Concord. I will not surrender to Procyon aggressors, and my hive will never bow to Centauri oppression," chittered an insectoid student from the opposite side. Just like that, the political divide threatened to resurface. Mel could see the fragile cooperation beginning to fracture. "Enough," she shouted, slamming her tool against the wall with a loud clang that startled everyone. "No one is surrendering to anyone. We're staying neutral, and we're staying alive. This is exactly what they want: divide and conquer. Classic Earth warfare strategy, probably universal too." She turned to Krell, who had pulled himself upright but was still clinging to his podium for support. "Professor, with all due respect to your historical expertise, this isn't a case study, it's our lives. And surrendering to either side would mean half the students here would be treated as enemy combatants or political prisoners." Before Krell could respond, the tech team called out, "We've accessed a local communication node," Vrax announced. "Limited range, but we can monitor emergency channels." "It's not good." Mel hurried over to their makeshift communication array, a cobbled-together collection of personal devices interfaced with classroom equipment in ways that probably violated several Academy regulations and physical laws. The situation was indeed dire. Both the Procyon Alliance and Centauri Concord had launched simultaneous protective actions targeting the Academy. Each claimed they were preventing the other from taking control of the neutral education zone. The station's defensive systems had been compromised, possibly from within. Security forces were overwhelmed, and the Chancellor's status was unknown. Most worrying, both factions were specifically targeting areas with concentrations of students from rival political entities. This wasn't just politics, it was potential genocide disguised as preventative security. "They're going section by section," Vrax explained, his middle eye narrowed in concentration as he analyzed the data. "Securing students aligned with their factions, neutralizing opposition." "What about neutral species?" Mel asked. "Considered strategic assets, to be secured by whoever reaches them first." Lixnara joined them, her forearms moving in agitated patterns. The medical team patched into health monitoring systems. Life support is failing in multiple sections. There's evidence of decompression events. Mel felt sick. They're exposing sections to vacuum. Only as last resort measures, Lixnara clarified, though her tone suggested how hollow that distinction was. Meanwhile, the gelatinous student had made progress with the security droid. "I've partially restored its memory core. Before systems failure, it recorded security forces engaging with boarding parties from both factions. The Academy's own security forces are split, some supporting each side. No one's coming to save us," Mel concluded. "We're on our own." Another explosion rocked the station, closer than before. The lights dimmed momentarily as emergency power compensated. "Structural integrity at 74% and declining," announced the room's AI. Station segments 7 through 12 have been sealed due to critical damage. Professor Krell's tentacles wrapped tightly around his torso, his species' version of a panic response. "We're doomed." The historical precedent for civilians caught between military factions is statistically grim. No, we're not doomed, Mel insisted. We just need a plan. Look, this classroom is in the historical archives wing, right? Vrax, what's special about that? Vrax's eyes blinked in sequence as he considered. The archives contain irreplaceable artifacts from founding species. The section has independent life support, reinforced structures, and, Mel prompted, and its own shuttle bay for secure transportation of artifacts. A murmur of hope rippled through the assembled students. That's our way out, Mel said. But we need to reach it, and we need to do it together. No faction divisions. We all go, or none of us go. Ridiculous, scoffed Krell. Such cooperation between rival political entities during active conflict has no successful historical precedent. Actually, Mel countered, Earth history is full of enemies working together during disasters. We call it common humanity, though I guess here it would be common sentience. When the stakes are high enough, survival instincts can overcome political differences. She turned to address the entire class. I know you all think humans are primitive. And yeah, by your standards, maybe we are. We still fight wars, we still have borders, we still struggle with unity. But those struggles taught us something your species might have evolved past too quickly: how to set aside differences when facing extinction. The room was silent as her words sank in. So here's my primitive human plan, Mel continued. We pool our resources, skills and knowledge. We move together through the maintenance tunnels to the archive shuttle bay. We take a transport and head for the neutral monitoring station at the system's edge. No politics, no factions, just survival. Anyone who doesn't like it is welcome to stay here and wait for their side to arrive. If the station doesn't decompress first. She held her breath, waiting for the response. To her surprise, it was the crystalline Centauria-line student who spoke first. The human's logic is sound. Dividing by faction ensures half of us perish. Unity offers statistical advantage. The insectoid student chittered in agreement. My hive recognizes practical necessity. Temporary cooperation is acceptable. One by one, students from across political divides signaled their agreement. Even Professor Krell, after much tentacle wringing, conceded that the unorthodox approach might be their only option. I must note for the academic record, he insisted, that I find no historical basis for optimism regarding this strategy. Noted, Professor, Mel replied, with a hint of a smile. Now let's make some history of our own. Within minutes, they had organized into a functional unit. Students with sensory capabilities beyond standard visual spectrum took point positions. Those with defensive abilities or technology formed a protective perimeter around vulnerable species. The technically skilled maintained their makeshift communications and monitoring equipment. Using the environmental components she'd been working with, Mel constructed a crude but effective motion detector that could give them advance warning of approaching threats. The floating jellyfish students, with their natural bioelectric fields, could serve as living proximity alarms if they stayed at the group's perimeter. Ready? Mel asked, standing before the maintenance tunnel entrance they'd determined offered the safest route. Vrax handed her a makeshift weapon cobbled together from classroom equipment, essentially a directed energy pulse using power cells from multiple devices. For a primitive species, he said, with what Mel had learned was his version of a smile, you demonstrate remarkable adaptability. That's humanity's superpower, she replied, checking the improvised weapon. We never evolved past the need to improvise, to cooperate under pressure, to face impossible odds with nothing but determination and duct tape. Well, the galactic equivalent anyway. As she led the unlikely procession of rival alien students into the maintenance tunnel, Mel couldn't help but think that perhaps humanity's primitive status wasn't a weakness after all. Sometimes, evolution could take away as much as it gave. And right now, being human, stubborn, resourceful, and impossibly optimistic in the face of catastrophe might be exactly what they all needed to survive.
3 standard cycles later, Mel stood at the observation deck of Neutral Monitoring Station Epsilon 9, watching the distant emergency vessels still swarming around Galactic Academy. The station's elegant ring structure was now marred by dark, damaged sections, though the worst of the fighting had ended once galactic peacekeeping forces arrived. The human contemplates her victory, came Professor Krell's voice from behind her. Mel turned to find the Vorkman floating toward her, his tentacles arranged in what she now recognized as a formal posture of respect. Not a victory, Professor. Just survival. Krell's eye stalk swiveled to observe the distant academy. Perhaps the distinction between victory and survival is another of those primitive concepts that more evolved species have forgotten. Mel raised an eyebrow. That almost sounds like a compliment, a factual observation. The historical record will show that 27 students and one faculty member from classroom 12B survived intact, while 63% of other classrooms suffered casualties or were separated by faction. We worked together, Mel shrugged. Nothing special about that. On the contrary, Krell's voice had lost its usual condescension. The ability to forge functional unity among hostile political entities during active conflict is unprecedented in recent galactic history. He extended a formal documentation tendril, the Vorquin equivalent of offering a document. I have submitted this to the Chancellor's office. Mel accepted the data crystal, scanning its contents on her newly upgraded translator device. It was a formal academic paper titled The Harper Protocol, Primitive Crisis Response as a Model for Modern Conflict Resolution. You named a protocol after me. It was Vrax's suggestion, Krell admitted, though I concurred with the appropriateness. Your methods improvised technology, adaptive leadership structure, suspension of hierarchical norms during crisis contradicted all established academic models. Yet they proved remarkably effective. Mel stared at the crystal in disbelief. But you spent the entire semester explaining why human approaches were primitive and ineffective. And you proved me wrong. Krell's skin shifted to a deep blue, a color Mel had never seen him display before. A true scholar must acknowledge when data contradicts theory. Your species possesses unique qualities that more technologically advanced civilizations would be unwise to dismiss. Before Mel could respond, the observation deck doors slid open. Vrax entered, followed by a procession of students from their classroom: Lixnara, the crystalline student, the insectoid collective, the gelatinous tech specialist, and others. Many still showed signs of their ordeal, but all were alive. The Chancellor's representatives wish to speak with you, Vrax announced. All of you. What do they want? Mel asked, suddenly wary. Despite their escape, the political situation remained tense. To learn, answered the crystalline student, facets glowing a peaceful blue. The Centauri Concord has officially requested the implementation of the Harper Protocol for future diplomatic negotiations. The Procyon Alliance as well, chittered the insectoid. My hive cluster has received communication that your methods are being studied by both factions. Lixnara stepped forward, all four arms extended in a formal gesture. They wished to know how a classroom of previously hostile factions traversed 3 kilometers of contested territory, commandeered an archive shuttle, and successfully evacuated to neutral space without a single casualty. I just did what humans have always done, Mel said, uncomfortable with the attention. Found a way through when there wasn't supposed to be one. Precisely, Professor Krell interjected, a quality my historical analysis failed to properly value. The ability to operate outside established parameters, to imagine solutions unconstrained by evolutionary or technological assumptions. This is humanity's contribution to galactic civilization. Are you saying being primitive is actually our strength? Mel asked incredulously. I am saying, Krell replied carefully, that primitive is perhaps the wrong classification entirely. Adaptable might be more accurate. Resilient, perhaps even ingenious in ways that more specialized evolution has not prioritized. The station's communication system chimed, announcing the arrival of the Chancellor's delegation. It appears, Vrax noted with his three-eyed equivalent of a smile, that the human exchange program has been more educational than anticipated, for all parties involved. As they moved to meet the delegation, Lixnara fell into step beside Mel. I have submitted a formal request to join the next exchange cohort to Earth, she announced. My xenobiology focus has shifted somewhat. Really? Mel asked. What are you studying now? Human adaptability as an evolutionary advantage. My working thesis suggests that what appeared to be developmental delays in human civilization may actually represent a specialized evolutionary path optimizing for crisis response and innovation under pressure. Mel laughed. So basically, we're not primitive, we're just specialized for chaos. An inelegant but accurate summary, Lixnara agreed. Your species' tendency toward what you call MacGyvering solutions may represent an advanced form of cognitive flexibility that more technologically dependent species have engineered out of their development. They reached the diplomatic reception area, where representatives from multiple galactic powers waited. Mel noticed they were all staring at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to something that looked remarkably like respect. Professor Krell moved forward, tentacles arranged in formal academic presentation posture. Honored representatives, I present Melody Harper of Earth, whose primitive, he caught himself, eye stalk swiveling toward Mel apologetically, whose innovative crisis management techniques have been documented as the Harper Protocol. As the historical record will now reflect, there are circumstances where human methodologies provide optimal solutions to complex galactic challenges. As the delegation surrounded her with questions and requests for demonstrations of human improvisation techniques, Mel caught Vrax's gaze across the room. He gave her the three-eyed blink that she now knew meant approval and satisfaction. Who would have thought that being the primitive exchange student would end up changing interstellar diplomatic protocols? That human backwardness would turn out to be exactly what the galaxy needed in a crisis. As the Chancellor herself approached to formally request that Mel extend her exchange program to include diplomatic training, Mel couldn't help but smile at the irony. "I'd be happy to share human crisis management techniques," she told the assembled galactic elite. "But fair warning, most of our best ideas came from trying to fix things with duct tape and paperclips while the clock was ticking down." "Fascinating," murmured the Chancellor. "And these duct tape and paperclips are some form of advanced Earth technology." Mel caught Professor Krell's eye. The historian's tentacles were twitching with what she now recognized as suppressed amusement. "Something like that," Mel replied diplomatically. "Let's just say that sometimes the most powerful technology isn't technology at all, it's the ability to think beyond it." As the galactic representatives nodded sagely at what they clearly thought was profound human wisdom, Mel allowed herself a small private smile. She was still just a human exchange student, but apparently, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. Sometimes being primitive was the most advanced thing you could be.